Part 6, Chapter 10. The Plaza Hotel had suffered some damage during the recent time of the aliens, but had since regained at least a semblance of its former elegance. Julie went there that evening wearing a stunning red cocktail dress. She looked, if not exactly like a celebrity, then definitely like a celebrity's girlfriend. The doorman opened the door for her, bowing deeply. She entered the big, brilliantly lit lobby. The reception desk was straight ahead. She didn't want to get too close to it, yet. She glanced at her watch as if she was expecting to meet somebody. All the time, she was taking in the details. People were very well dressed. This was a place where money was in very good supply. To one side, a small orchestra was playing a quaint song from olden times called "Smoke Gets in Your Eyes." People were coming in and out of the bar with its glowing mahogany paneling and its soft, indirect lighting. She would have liked a drink now, but she had an unbreakable rule: no alcohol or any other kind of drug while she was on a job. She looked around the bar and then the lobby. Her practiced eye picked out the security men, 2 of them near the potted palms. She could always tell who they were. They just didn't look like the guests, no matter how well they dressed. She counted 5 of them. They gave her admiring glances, but there was nothing suspicious in their looks. So far, so good. The big hotel was in full swing. There were lights everywhere, and elegant people, and the accoutrements of success. You could smell it in the $5 cigars and the expensive perfume on the white shoulders of the women. In the aroma of roast beef, the real thing, wafting out from under silver servers as black-coated waiters brought the well-laden plates around. In the very carpet, permeated with expensive preservatives and subtle-smelling oils. Julie went to the elevators. One was reserved for the penthouse suites. There was a man standing near it, rocking back and forth on his heels as he surveyed the passing crowds. Julie made him for a plainclothes cop, maybe somebody's bodyguard. She walked on past and went through a set of corridors back into the main lobby. She was pretty sure that the guy at the penthouse elevator hadn't noticed her. She was also sure that a frontal assault on the apartment wasn't the best idea. Gibberman had taken this possibility into account. Next door to the plaza was the Hotel Van Dyke. Khalil's apartment was a penthouse in the plaza. If, for any reason, Julie didn't want to use the elevator, Gibberman had indicated an ingenious alternative way of gaining entry. It involved swinging from an unoccupied top-floor apartment in the Van Dyke and going in through Khalil's window. A cat burglar act, but that was one of Julie's specialities. She wished Stan could be here to watch her, but it wouldn't be safe, and it might distract her. She had no trouble slipping into the Van Dyke with a group of people going to the top-floor restaurant. When they got off at the top floor, Julie got out with them, but instead of entering the restaurant, she ducked into the short flight of service stairs that led to the roof. From there, she had a fine view of Upper Manhattan, with the dark mass of Central Park directly in front of her, and traffic crawling by a long way below on the street. A cutting wind blew her hair around, and she slipped on a knit cap to hold it in place. "Here we go," she said aloud. She fixed her ropes and swung over to the roof of the plaza. From there, she tied her rope to a cornice and, taking a deep breath, swung out again into space, bracing herself with one foot so as not to spin. The stars and the street seemed equally distant as she lowered herself to the level of the apartment windows. They were open, saving her from having to cut through them with a vibrator tool. She swung in through the billowing white curtains, landed soundlessly inside the darkened apartment, and rolled to her feet. She could see pretty well with the infrared-enhanced goggles she now snapped on. Her feet were set in a defensive pose, but there was no one there. She gave the rope a snap, and it came free from the cornice. She wound it around her waist. Now there was no evidence of her means of entry. She looked around the apartment. It was large, with a drawing room and a separate bedroom. She checked out the kitchen. The refrigerator was filled with a very good brand of champagne, and there were tins of caviar in the pantry. This Khalil seemed to live on the rarest of fare. The question now was, where did he keep the jewellery? She knew that Gibberman had chosen this mark carefully. Ahmed Khalil was renowned as an international playboy. He loved to give expensive gifts to his ladies of the evening. But where did he keep the trinkets? She had already learned from inside sources that he didn't entrust them to hotel safes. He wanted them close at hand for the moment when he chose to reward his current lady. She moved quickly around the apartment. Although the place was big, it was still only a hotel suite. The stuff has to be here somewhere. And then, suddenly, the lights came on. "Good evening, my dear," a deep, resonant voice said. Julie saw a tall, very thin, dark-faced man leaning negligently against the wall. He was wearing a checked headdress. He had a short beard and a luxuriant moustache. His face was narrow, and he had a hawk's nose with a large mole in the left corner. Standing beside him was another man, also an Arab, but large. In fact, huge, with a full head of fuzzy black hair and so much facial hair that his features were all but obscured. Julie, however, had no trouble seeing the knife he held in his right hand. "What are you doing here?" Julie asked. "You're supposed to be seeing an opera." Khalil, the tall, thin man, smiled. "Your information is reliable. But so was my counterintelligence service. We always keep an eye on Gibberman when we come to New York. He's stung us before. We knew when you visited him to set up this job. Didn't we, Safat?" The giant smiled and touched the point of his dagger with the ball of his thumb. Khalil said, "Gibberman was happy to tell us what he had set up for this evening." Julie nodded. "Talk about luck." You mustn't hold it against Gibberman for talking," Khalil said. "When Safat takes the knife to somebody, secrets are shouted from the rooftops. His skill is better than a surgeon's. With that knife, he can lay bare a single nerve in the arm, for example, and play on it as if it were the string on a violin. It is an unforgettable experience, my dear, and one I'm sure you wouldn't want to miss." Julie thought of how she had told Stan that nothing ever went wrong. What a laugh. Of course, it was all bad luck. How could she have guessed that Khalil would find out about Gibberman? She had discounted the efficiency of the counterintelligence corps these rich Arabs employed. "Well, Khalil," Julie said, "looks like I'm foiled and caught in the act. Have your man step away from the door, and I'll leave quietly." Khalil smiled. I'm afraid it's not going to be so easy, my dear. You're going to turn me over to the police? Eventually. If there's enough left of you. First, however, it will be necessary to teach you a lesson. Safat! The big man took a slow step towards her. Julie said, I thought it would be like that. Thanks, Khalil. For what? For freeing me of any scruples. If I ever had any, you've put them completely out of my mind. She turned to face Safat, who took 2 steps towards her, while Khalil folded his arms and waited for the fun to begin, a small smile on his lips. Safat lifted his arms, hands formed into blades. He bent his knees, feet pointed outward, and Julie recognized the typical fighting stance of a Saudi karate fighter. It was a technique that had its limitations. Safat advanced, mincingly for so large a man, and his bearded face was set in a mask of cruelty. As he came within range, his left hand darted out, the fingers shaped like a hawk's head. She was ready for it, had been anticipating it. She ducked under the swooping blow, and with a short, economical kick, connected with Safat's left kneecap. He had been turning as she kicked, and some of the force of the blow was lost. Nevertheless, it was enough to take his feet out from under him. He fell heavily, and Julie pounced. But this time he caught her unaware. Safat's clumsy fall had been feigned, and as she came leaping at him, his arms and legs were drawn up, cat fashion. And he lashed out, expecting to catch her in the solar plexus. She had seen her danger a moment before his counterstroke, however, and turning in mid-air, managed to avoid his flailing limbs. Her stiffened elbow caught him in the pit of the stomach, knocking the air out of him, and in the second it took him to recover, she rolled away and regained her feet. Khalil had been watching all of this, dumbfounded. Now, belatedly, he stirred into action. He stepped forward, crouching in a classic knife fighter's pose. The weapon he carried in his right hand and low against his body was a yatta, a traditional Yemeni dagger, about 8 inches long, slightly curved and sharpened to a razor edge. It was made from a Swedish saw blade and fitted with an elaborate rhino horn handle. Arabic letters were engraved on the blade. Julie's eyes widened when she saw the weapon. You do well to fear the yatta, Khalil said, advancing, light twinkling off the point like the gaze of a one-eyed basilisk. Oh, I wasn't exactly afraid of it, Julie said. Just surprised to see it. Rhino horn is not legally traded. Is it genuine? Of course, Khalil said, feinting and then making a lightning stab at her. I always kill with the genuine article. I'm sure glad to hear that, Julie said. That makes that knife extremely valuable. The blade darted towards her midsection. Julie spun, and the thing passed harmlessly along her left side. As it passed, her arm snapped down, trapping the weapon. Khalil began a long and elaborate Arabic curse in the guttural dialect of Omdurman, but got out no more than a couple of syllables before Julie's left elbow crashed with pile-driver force into the middle of his face. Blood streaming from his nose and mouth, Khalil stumbled backward, losing his grip on the knife that was still clamped under Julie's left arm. I'll just keep this for you, Julie said, slipping the knife into her belt. It might reduce its value if we got blood all over it. A feint to the midsection drew down Khalil's guard. Fingers folded in protectively, Julie snapped a blow. The heel of her hand caught Khalil where the upper lip meets the nose. 4 of his front teeth cracked off clean at the gum line. "You ought to thank me," Julie said. "I've corrected your overbite, and I haven't even charged you for it." Khalil fell down, screaming. He rolled on the floor, clutching his head and whimpering. Bloody foam spattered from his mouth. Julie watched him critically for a moment, then muttered, "That ought to keep you occupied for a while." She turned to Safat, who had regained his feet, and although his balance was just the slightest bit off kilter, he was still formidable. If rage could kill, then Julie would be dead 10 times over. He came towards her on the attack. He was about twice the weight of the slender girl, and he was containing his fury now as he backed her into an angle of the wall, just to one side of an indifferent copy of Gainsborough's Blue Boy. There seemed no way she could get out of this one. Shouting an oath in street Arabic, Safat launched his attack. Julie had had long preparation for moments like this. Shen Hui's instructions in self-defense had covered all the basics of unarmed combat. She had not been satisfied with that, however, since he accounted himself no expert in the finer points of self-defense. So, he had apprenticed her to Ullah Khan, a fat-faced master fighter from Isfahan in Central Asia. Khan, beguiled by her beauty, had said, "My arrangement with your master is that you will stay with me and serve me in all particulars until you can beat me at unarmed combat. That might take more than a lifetime, my pet." In fact, it took just 5 months, and Ullah Khan ended up in hospital for his presumption. And so, now, with Safat launching his impetuous and ill-considered attack, Julie's problem was not how to cope with it, but which of several methods to choose. She also had to decide to what extent she wished to incapacitate him, and this, in turn, depended on her estimation of his value to her, alive. In the split of a second, she decided that this gross, hairy-faced man with the bad breath was of no value to her, and indeed could serve her better dead as a message to his master, Khalil, to stop resisting and start cooperating. She didn't think all that through consciously. Instead, she opposed his charge with a sword hand, fingers stiffened. Safat crashed into her hand and was stopped abruptly as the fingers took him high between the eyes, shutting down his pineal gland and then going on to break his neck. His eyes rolled up, showing the white, and he crashed to the floor like 200 pounds of dead mutton. She turned from him to Khalil. "Ready to go another round?" she asked. Khalil, his teeth scattered over the floor, had had enough. He mumbled through a blood-stained hand. "Don't hurt me anymore. I'm a dilettante, not a fighter. I'll give you whatever you want." "That's what I like to hear," Julie said. She took a pillow from a nearby bed and stripped off the pillowcase. "Fill it with good stuff for me," she said. "Don't put in any worthless crap, or I'll have something to say about it." Khalil, totally unnerved, couldn't even dream of resistance. His collapse was absolute. He opened a compartment concealed in the wall behind the bed and picked several precious bracelets. 2 handfuls of magnificent unmounted gems in a chamois bag, and a string of glorious Baroque pearls, each the size of a pigeon's egg, and no two alike. Soon the pillowcase was bulging. Khalil had other objects he wanted to give her, but she stopped him. "One bagful is enough. I'm not greedy. Besides, I'd need an extra pair of hands to carry it all." Khalil recovered sufficiently to say, "If you're finished, then get out." "Okay," Julie said. "This is goodbye then." She moved close to him. He stared at her. The whites of his eyes went a dirty yellow as she advanced on him. He stumbled away, found himself with his back to a bureau. What are you going to do?" he asked in a shaking voice. "Just give you a couple of hours sleep, so I can walk out of here like a lady." She touched a nerve in his neck. He slumped to the floor, unconscious. "Be sure to have a dentist look at those stumps," she said. He couldn't hear her, of course, but she was sure he'd remember anyway. Julie went to the dressing room mirror and checked her clothing and makeup. She repaired her lipstick, which had been smeared in the combat, and found an ugly red stain on the shoulder of her red dress. Luckily, Khalil had a really smart ermine jacket in his closet. It covered the stain nicely. She left by the penthouse elevator. No one stopped her as she walked out, passed through the lobby, and exited the revolving front door onto Central Park South, where she called a taxi. Chapter 11. "How did it go tonight?" Stan asked when she got back to the brownstone. "Not bad," she said, dumping her loot onto the bed. "A dream night for a thief. Unfortunately, it's nowhere near enough to buy a spaceship with." "We don't need to buy one," Stan said. "I've got a plan that ought to work now that we have some money to play around with. The first thing we're going to need is a spaceship driver." "I'd love to talk about it," Julie said. "But first, I need a bath, and I'm famished. Sometimes stealing can be hard work. Oh, by the way, here's a present." She tossed the dagger onto the bed. Stan picked it up and admired the gleaming narrow blade and the rhino handle. "Where did you get this?" "Just a little trinket I picked up during the evening." Chapter 12. Over the next 2 weeks, Julie converted the loot from Khalil's apartment into cash, and Stan lost no time putting it to work. There was information to buy, people to bribe, and round-the-clock work by hired technicians to put Norbert into full working condition. 2 weeks to the day after Julie's theft at the plaza, she met Stan for lunch at the tavern on the green in Central Park. Since it wasn't a workday for her, she permitted herself a cocktail. Stan was looking pretty well. A shade paler than usual, but still not bad for a man dying of cancer and sustaining himself on heavy doses of the most addicting narcotic substance known to man. His eyes were a little dreamy, but his voice was firm enough as he said, "Julie, we're ready to make our move." "Today?" "That's right. Are you ready?" She gave him an exasperated look. "Of course. You really don't have to ask me that." Sorry. I didn't mean anything by it." Her voice softened. "No, I'm sorry, Stan. I didn't mean to snap at you. It's the waiting. It's hard on my nerves." "Well," Stan said, "it'll soon be over, If this plan works, we'll have ourselves a pilot. And if it doesn't work, we could be dead. Fair enough. Where are we going? To look up an old friend of mine and make him an offer he can't refuse.